The views expressed on this program are not necessarily those of WTJX, its board, staff, or underwriters.
On this episode of Comes with the Territory,
I am not leaving the people of the Virgin Islands.
we sit down with Senator Donna Frett-Gregory to talk about her decision not to seek re-election, the highlights of her time in office, and what's next for her beyond the legislature. The proposed leadership for the 36th legislature has been announced, including the Senate president and officers, the majority leader and key committee chairs. We'll analyze the selections and their potential impact. And while the incoming legislature prepares to step into these roles, public frustration lingers over the outgoing legislature's gap in oversight on challenges at the Juan Luis Hospital and persistent sewage spills across the territory. We'll break it all down. Plus, the Virgin Islands Supreme Court has ruled that the Superior Court must cover the cost of pre-child monitoring, at least for now. We'll examine what this means going forward. Stay tuned as this week's panel joins the conversation to analyze these issues and more. Comes with the Territory starts now. Welcome to Comes with the Territory. Happy holidays to you. I'm Marcelina Ventura Douglas. Senator Donna Frett-Gregory, who has been the top vote getter in the St. Thomas-St. John district since her first election, is closing her chapter in the legislature after 6 years of service. She's made it clear, however, that her commitment to serving the people of the Virgin Islands will continue in a different role. Here's more.
I came to this decision after careful reflection and discussion with family members, friends, supporters, and constituents.
On the final day to file nomination papers for the primary and general elections, Senator Donna Frett-Gregory announced on the Senate floor that she would not seek a fourth term. Frett-Gregory, who has consistently received the most votes in the St. Thomas-St. John district, shared why she made the decision.
After 37 years of public service, the last 6 of which I have been a member of this body. And I think that now, I know that now, I am ready to write a new chapter by continuing to be of service to the people of the Virgin Islands in a different forum and in a different role.
Frett-Gregory began her legislative career in the 33rd Legislature as Vice President and Chair of the Budget, Appropriations, and Finance Committee. In her second term, she became Senate President, and in the current 35th Legislature, she returned to chair the Budget Committee. During her 6 years in the Senate, she sponsored several bills, including one that created the Bureau of School Construction and Maintenance. Before joining the legislature, Frett-Gregory had a long career in government service. She was Commissioner of the Department of Education, Director of Operations for the Bureau of Corrections for 15 years, and Chief Finance Officer for the Virgin Islands Port Authority. In her farewell remarks, she made it clear this isn't the end of her service to the community.
Rest assured, my service to the Virgin Islands and our people will not end with my Senate term. I will continue to be the voice for accountability and remain committed to the principle that government works best when we put our collective heads together and leave our egos at the door.
Joining me on set for an in-depth discussion on her public service journey and what the future holds is Senator Donna Frett-Gregory. Welcome back to the show, Senator Donna Frett-Gregory.
Thank you. How are you?
Good.
Great.
Now, let's start at the beginning. Tell me, what first inspired you to run for Senate?
I always wanted to be in public office. Actually, I ran for the Board of Education in 1992 and actually won. I served on the 13th Board of Education. A lot of people don't know that. I was very young at that time. But I served in government for about 31 years prior to me making the decision to run for Senate. And I made that decision because I wanted to serve more. I wanted to do something different. I've served in various capacities in the territory, but what I really wanted to do was have a broader reach, impact more of my community. So that's the reason.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, in your freshman year, you started out as Senate Vice President and Chair of the Budget, Appropriations, and Finance Committee. However, after the majority was reorganized, you were reassigned as chair for education and workforce development. Tell me, how did those series of events shape your legislative career?
Actually, I have no regrets. I actually have no regrets. It actually was a good thing for me. It gave me the opportunity to see exactly what happens inside the institution, and the fact, in fact, I always served in the C-suite in government, and I served as a manager in government. And basically, when you become a senator, it's very different. You're not manager of any of those legislators, so you have to work as a team with those senators, with your colleagues. So it gave me a different perspective, and made me realize that in order for me to move forward in the legislature, it requires lots of collaboration.
Would you
Yes.
say that that's part of one of the biggest lessons that you've learned in the 6 years that you've been at the legislature?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a big lesson because it gave me perspective. It was a good thing for me being a new senator, for coming in and that experience. It seemed like a setback, but I actually took those lemons and made lemonade.
Okay.
It was a good time for me.
All
Yes.
right. Now, do you think were some of the biggest challenges that you faced during your time as Senate President and also as chair for the Committee on Budget and Appropriations?
Making tough decisions. We've had to make some very tough decisions. I recall when we had to make the decision with regards to the government employees retirement system and floating those bonds. That came before the legislature 3 times, and it failed, I think, the first 2, and it finally passed. It was a tough decision. And then we made the decision with regards to the Whistling Key swap, the land swap. That was also a tough decision that I had to make. So those were some of the challenges, difficult decisions and challenges. But at the end of the day, what's important is you do your research and you vote your conscience. And that's what I did in both instances.
Okay. Now, we spoke about your challenges. Tell me, what do you think is some of your accomplishments that you're most proud of?
Oh, absolutely. So I am most proud of, I focus a lot around education. Of course, I worked in education for quite some time, and I recognized there were things that I needed to address as a senator. And one of those things that's most important for me, or was most important for me, is separating the school system from the maintenance of our schools. And I worked very hard. I was relentless in ensuring that bill passed. So establishing the Bureau of School Construction was one of it is my most proud accomplishment that I've made in the Senate. The Bureau is now stand up, and I'm seeing the fruits of the labor. Also, there's just so much, though. There's so much for me to be thankful for as a senator. The agricultural plan. You know that we have vast land in the Island District of St. Croix in particular, and I was the proud sponsor of the agricultural plan. And the University of the Virgin Islands, along with the Department of Agriculture, they did the work. And today we have an agriculture plan that we are, in fact, funding. So I am most proud of those 2 pieces of legislation.
Good.
Yes.
Now, I want to ask you, when it comes to the Bureau of, school maintenance, do you find that it's currently operating in the way that you envisioned it to be operating?
Somewhat, but I'm giving it time. What's important is that the funding is available. There is a commitment that annually the legislature shall provide at minimum $5 million. So they just stood it up this year. So I have to give it time. But trust me, I have my eyes on it. Absolutely. Okay. Yes.
Now, you're getting ready to depart now tell me, is there any unfinished business that you have that you're hoping that, you have the next legislative body will take the mantle up and keep it going?
There is some unfinished business. I'm one that comes up with great ideas. So I laid out several pieces of legislation.
Okay.
Yes. I don't want to say what they are, but what I'll tell you is I am speaking to some senators to share some of my legislation with them that's very important for us as a community to move forward.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, when you reflect on your time in the Senate, what do you hope your legacy is going to be?
Oh, absolutely. I would love to share that with you. So from my perspective, my legacy, I worked very hard as a legislator, and my legacy was ensuring that I did all I could do for the people. My legacy is around focusing on education, ensuring that we stand up education in a meaningful way, addressing the issues that we have with our budget, our finances, and ensuring that we hold the departments and agencies accountable. So for me, accountability and transparency, absolutely, yes.
Okay, now there's been some public discussion regarding now that you're departing the legislature, about you and your next steps. Are you taking these next 2 years to ramp up a gubernatorial run?
I'm taking these next 2 years to explore what my next steps will be as a community leader. Yes.
Okay.
I am looking to do some work in the private sector. I think it's important that you're well-rounded as a community leader. So I want to give myself an opportunity to do some work in the private sector. So most definitely I am exploring doing some work in the private sector. And of course, doing some consulting work as well.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Absolutely. Okay. And exploring my community overall, talking to people, finding out what they're interested in, what they want to see as Virgin Islanders, and how myself as a leader can support my community. Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here and for sharing with us, and we look forward to seeing what's going to happen in the future with you.
Thank you.
All right. Coming up, we'll hear from this week's panel, but first, let's take a look at the issues up for discussion.
Good morning, colleagues.
Senator Milton Potter, who chaired the Disaster Recovery, Infrastructure, and Planning Committee in the 35th Legislature, is the proposed Senate President of the 36th Legislature, according to a press release issued recently by the incoming body.
What I bring is a level of steady, level-headed leadership. Very rarely will you see me making a big dramatic speech on the floor. I'm just going to be focusing on trying to find what the problem is, and let's work together to find a solution.
Other proposed officers include Senator Kenneth Gittins as Vice President, Senator-elect Avery Lewis as Secretary, and Senator-elect Kurt Viale as Majority Leader, according to the press release. Viale, who previously served 4 terms in the legislature, said his focus as Senate Majority Leader will be on collaborating with colleagues to determine the territory's most pressing issues.
And then have those committees that have oversight and jurisdiction, have those fact-finding hearings that are going to probe as to exactly how we're going to be able to deal with these issues, confront these issues, and what is needed to make sure that government functions the way that it's supposed to.
The incoming Senate Majority Caucus, made up of 12 Democrats, also proposed leadership for key legislative committees, including Senator Novel Francis Jr. as chair of the Budget, Appropriations, and Finance Committee, with Senator Marvin Blyden as vice chair. Senator Carla Joseph as chair of the Rules and Judiciary Committee, supported by Gittins as vice chair. Viale as chair of the Education and Workforce Development Committee, with Lewis as vice chair, and Senator Ray Fonseca continuing as chair of the Health and Hospitals and Human Services Committee, with Senator-elect Hubert Frederick as vice chair. Other proposed committee leadership positions include Senator Maurice James as chair of the Disaster Recovery, Infrastructure, and Planning Committee, Senator Angel Bolquez Jr. as chair of the Culture, Youth, Aging, Sports, and Parks Committee, Frederick as chair of the Economic Development and Agriculture Committee, Lewis as chair of the Government Operations and Consumer Protection Committee, Senator-elect Clifford Joseph as chair of the Homeland Security, Justice, and Public Safety Committee, and Blyden continuing his role as chair of the Housing, Transportation, and Telecommunications Committee. The Minority Caucus includes Senators Dwayne DeGraff, Alma Francis Heiliger, and Franklin Johnson. The members of the 36th Legislature will formally vote on the proposals during their first legislative session on Monday, January 13th, following a swearing-in ceremony.
JFL continues to struggle with the problem of border patients who no longer need acute hospitalization but cannot be discharged. This challenge directly impacts the emergency room department wait times, creating a domino effect.
Borders at Juan Luis Hospital leading to longer emergency room wait times, staffing shortages, and a cash flow deficit were among the challenges outlined by then CEO Doug Koch in an April update to the Senate Committee on Health, Hospitals, and Human Services. 2 months later, Koch announced his resignation, leaving Chief Operating Officer Hazel Filbert to step in as interim CEO. By July, during budget hearings before the Senate Finance Committee, Filbert revealed that the hospital was operating with only 3 emergency room doctors, far short of the 7 required for 24/7 care. The community's growing concerns about the hospital are hard to ignore. Staff members have raised alarms about a leaky roof in the neonatal intensive care unit and the absence of an electronic system to track patient supplies, which may be costing the hospital valuable revenue. In August, former Senator Nellie O'Reilly took to social media, sharing this photo from inside the hospital of a patient lying on a makeshift cot made of 3 chairs. She called the situation cruel and unacceptable. Despite these ongoing problems and the hospital's leadership change, the Legislature's Committee on Health, Hospitals, and Human Services has not held a single meeting since April, specifically to address what many believe has become a full-blown crisis at Juan Luis Hospital. Public frustration is also growing over the ongoing sewage spills that seem to have become more frequent in recent months. On October 5th, a malfunction at the LBG pump station caused raw sewage to flood Watergut and King Cross streets in downtown Christiansted. Businesses were forced to close, and officials urged residents to avoid the area due to potential health risk. A month later, the same pump station failed again, sending raw sewage into the Christiansted Harbor once more and triggering another round of health warnings. A business owner along the Christiansted Boardwalk threatened legal action against the Waste Management Authority, saying a disconnected pipe under the boardwalk had been leaking sewage into the harbor since March, creating foul odors and driving customers away. On St. Thomas, the Cancrine pump station has repeatedly failed this year, causing sewage overflows in the Windward Passage area and prompting calls from nearby residents for immediate action. In September, a collapsed sewer line in Noragata sent sewage flowing into the waters of the Charlotte-Amalie Harbor, right by the Legislature building. A contractor working to salvage a vessel after Tropical Storm Ernesto had to postpone the job due to high bacteria levels in the harbor. He reported that one diver became ill for days after entering the water, even while wearing a wetsuit. Despite these sewage spills repeatedly making local headlines and impacting businesses and public health, the Legislature's Committee on Disaster Recovery, Infrastructure, and Planning, which has oversight over the Waste Management Authority, has not convened a single meeting this year to address the worsening problem. The Virgin Islands Supreme Court has ruled that the judiciary must now cover the cost of pretrial electronic monitoring for defendants on house arrest, at least until official fees are set. The decision stems from a case involving Shaquille Berthier, who appealed a Superior Court order that required him to pay for electronic monitoring. While the Supreme Court agreed that ankle monitors can be required as a condition of pretrial release, it ruled that the Superior Court cannot pass those costs on to defendants because the High Court has not yet set a fee structure. Berthier had been on house arrest after his 2020 arrest for allegedly shooting into an occupied home. The charges were later dismissed, but he had already paid over $2,000 for pretrial electronic monitoring. According to the opinion filed on December 5th by Associate Justice Maria Cabret, only the Supreme Court can set fees for electronic monitoring, and until it does, the judiciary will pay the $10 per day cost. Court Administrator Regina DeChabert-Peterson explained that the ruling is not retroactive, so defendants who have already paid these fees will not be reimbursed. The judiciary covering pretrial electronic monitoring fees is still cheaper for the government than keeping detainees in jail. Housing an inmate or detainee at the John A. Bell Adult Correctional Facility is estimated to cost $320 per day, according to testimony from Bureau of Corrections Director Winnie Testemark during a Senate budget hearing.
Good morning, Stephanie Berry, Chief Operating Officer, Housing Finance Authority.
The former Chief Operating Officer of the Virgin Islands Housing Finance Authority is suing the agency, its Executive Director Eugene Jones Jr., and former Interim Director Dana Clendenin. Stephanie Berry alleges she was fired for raising concerns about mismanagement and procedural violations during her tenure. In a lawsuit filed December 1st, Berry accuses VIHFA of mishandling federally funded projects, including the Envision Tomorrow Homeowner Rehabilitation Program. According to the complaint, a 2022 HUD review found that several projects were not done in accordance with VIHFA's procurement policy and were disqualified by HUD. Berry also claims the agency's Planning and Construction Division, quote, had not facilitated the construction of new homes in over 6 years, despite having amassed about $14 million from the stamp tax legislation. She further alleges a conflict of interest in procurement practices, stating that staff who wrote the specifications for the work to be done, including pricing, were then allowed to participate in the evaluation of bids for the job and influence who was recommended to be awarded the job. Berry says she warned Clendenin about this, but Clendenin continued appointing those staff members to evaluation panels. Berry claims she faced pressure to stay silent. She recounts a warning from Jones, who allegedly told her that if she kept putting things in writing, it would be to her detriment. Berry says she was abruptly terminated in October 2024 without prior warnings or complaints about her performance. The case was filed under the Virgin Islands Whistleblower Protection Act and seeks damages for wrongful termination. Joining me on set to break things down is criminal defense attorney Melanie Turnbull. Welcome back to Comes with the Territory, Attorney Turnbull.
Thank you for having me.
From our St. Croix studio, let's welcome Ryan Flegel, owner of the Featherleaf Inn, and attorney Devin Carrington, a former licensing and consumer affairs commissioner. Thank you both for being here, gentlemen.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks.
Before we explore today's topics, I'd like to hear your thoughts on my conversation with Senator Donna Frett-Gregory. Mr. Flegel, what's your take on Senator Frett-Gregory's decision to step away from the legislature?
I respect her decision. I think it's great that she's choosing to take a new path. I've listened to all of her accomplishments, and I actually want to say one of the accomplishments that I really appreciate about her is her proactive choice to elevate women in elected office. I know she held forums or events to essentially encourage women to run for elected office and to help with that. And I think that's an excellent thing for her to be doing. I don't know whether or not she's going to run for governor, as of course none of us do, but it sure sounds like she's on that path. And then the question will be for the Virgin Islanders, do we want to essentially do more of electing the people who have been our leaders already, or is it time for some new leadership?
Now, Attorney Carrington, historically, we've never seen someone go directly from the legislature, even with a 2-year gap, to a successful bid as governor. Now, if in fact Senator Frett-Gregory does make a bid for governor, what do you think her chances are of successfully breaking that trend?
Well, the fact that she's been the top vote getter in St. Thomas says a whole lot. I know her personally. She's a very personable individual. She's visited St. Croix. She's here all the time, touching base with the people here. So I think her chances are good because her personality lends itself to, to invite people to get to know her and feel comfortable about her. So that's half of the ball game. People got to feel that they can touch you, they can speak to you, they can identify with you.
Okay. Now, Attorney Turnbull, I know she said she's considering these things, but do you think the territory is ready to elect its first female chief executive?
I do, because when we look at history, we see that former delegate to Congress, Donna Christensen, she had a very, I would consider it a relatively successful campaign, although she did not take the #1 spot, and it went to MAP. And then in the last cycle, we also had former Judge Soraya Diassi-Kofelt, who also, I believe, ran an excellent campaign. And so I do think that the Virgin Islands is ready. And when you look across the territory and look across the leadership, even within the cabinet now, there are a lot of women that are in high-profile positions. When you look at our legislative branch, when you look at our judiciary in the nation actually has the most women judges in comparison to every other state in the nation. And so the Virgin Islands is used to women in power. And so I don't think that'll be a hindrance for her if she decides to run.
All right. Well, we'll all be looking forward to seeing what's happening. Now, let's shift our focus to the proposed leadership of the incoming 36th legislature and what these elections could mean for the territory. Now, Attorney Turnbull, Senator Milton Potter proposed as the 36th legislature's Senate president. Now, why do you think the Democratic majority chose him over Senator Marvin Blyden, who has served longer in the legislature? He's more tenured, and he is the current vice president, and he's also a former majority leader.
I think sometimes what happens to people when they have longevity is that they can tend to be pigeonholed. So people may only see you in a certain position. And I think what Senator Potter had on his side in this term is that he had wind behind him. So he had momentum. And I agree with some of the things that he said. Not only did he have the momentum of being a top vote getter, he also has, I think, the temperament. And I think what hurt Senator Blyden is the longevity. I think sometimes people may think they want a fresh perspective. But I do think that, if they went with Biden, he would have been an excellent president. So I just think in this particular instance, I think that may have had the effect of hurting him. And unfortunately, or fortunately, they went with someone else.
Okay. Now, Attorney Carrington, I want to get your take on that. Do you agree with the sentiments that Attorney Turnbull just voiced?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense what she said. But on another note, I think that Senator Potter is an excellent choice. I worked with him when we worked in the MAP administration together. He's even-tempered. He has a real calm demeanor, and I think that that's the type of leadership you need. The tone of the legislature is sometimes set by the person at the top, and I think that his temperament lends itself to steady but calm, reasoned leadership.
All right. Now, Mr. Flegel, Senator Noble Francis, who now serves as vice chair of the Budget Appropriations and Finance Committee, has been tapped to chair the committee in the 36th legislature. Now, Senator-elect Kurt Viale has chaired the committee during multiple terms in the past. Why do you think maybe he wasn't chosen for the role again, and what might this decision suggest about the priorities for the incoming leadership?
Yeah, it's hard to tell what the posturing was amongst the senators as they selected who was going to chair which committee and which position they would have right now. What I do understand is that we saw a re-election right now of about 2/3 incumbents. People that were elected before got elected again. But if I go and I talk to anybody around in the Virgin Islands and I say, how do you like what our government is doing for us? What's your take on the government here? More often than not, by a large margin, I'm going to get people who are disgruntled with government. So I continue to be perplexed that we put the same people back in power to do the same job over and over again. The fact remains that we still have about 2/3 the same exact people that we had running the government right now are going to be running it for the next couple of years in the Virgin Islands.
Now, Attorney Carrington, I want to go back to you. Senator-elect Viale is proposed to serve as the Senate Majority Leader and chair for the Committee on Education and Workforce Development, which kind of seems like a natural fit, given his experience as a former principal and educator. How do you think this background in education is going to influence his role in the incoming legislature?
I think that Senator Viale, we worked together, we taught together several years ago. He's a no-nonsense guy. He performed well in his role as principal, as a teacher when we taught together, and then as principal at the St. Croix Educational Complex at its inception. And then he was transferred to the Arthur Richards School, which was a troubled school, and by all accounts, he did pretty well there. But more generally, I think that Senator Viale is going to temper the perception that the 12-member majority, which are all Democrats, will act as a rubber stamp for the governor. His challenge of the governor for his gubernatorial seat last cycle creates some sort of political dynamic that we got to look at. And I think that he's going to be instrumental in not at least allaying the possibility that people think that the legislature is a rubber stamp. He'll be a challenge to the governor.
Now, Attorney Turnbull, we did hear, Viale talk about this fact-finding. He's now going to be the majority leader. What are your thoughts on the role that he's going to play in the incoming legislature?
I think to Attorney Carrington's point of view, I think he is going to prevent the legislature from having this label of being a rubber stamp. But as we have seen, he comes to the floor prepared. He comes to the floor with pointed questions, working on behalf of the people. And so I think he's going to bring that same exact energy. And I don't look at him as though he is just coming to oppose the administration just because he ran before, but I think he's just coming to bring the same exact energy that he's always brought the times that he's been in his previous terms.
All right. Now, Attorney Carrington, I want to go back to you, and I want to talk about legislative oversight or the lack of it. Senator Ray Fonseca is slated to take on chair again as Health, Hospitals, and Human Services Committee. Yet during the 35th legislature, he held no fact-finding meetings on the critical issues at the Juan Luis Hospital since April, months before the CEO announced his resignation in June. Now, meanwhile, we in the media have been calling Juan Luis Hospital for answers about the community's concerns, but we have not gotten anywhere. At the same time, the Senate Committee on Disaster Recovery, Infrastructure, and Planning hasn't held a single meeting this year with Waste Management Authority to address the frequent sewage spills across all 3 islands in the territory. Now, even as sewage is being flowed into the harbor near the legislature building itself, Waste Management hasn't been called in for questioning to explain what's happening or what's being done to fix it. Attorney Carrington, what should the public make of this kind of oversight when it comes to addressing such critical issues?
I think the question would be better posed, what should the public make of the lack of oversight?
Yeah.
I think that it speaks to the very point that I spoke to earlier, this perception, and it's a strong perception, at least here in St. Croix, that the legislature, being composed of a majority of Democrats, acts as a rubber stamp for the governor. The governor basically said to, as I recall, I get what I want. And he's right. And so I think that the operative word, the key word for this legislature is oversight, oversight, oversight. They're supposed to act as a check and a balance between themselves and the executive. I think that I'm not sure about Senator Fonseca and I haven't followed him that much, but I think that hopefully Senator Frederick, who I think is vice chair in the committee, would be a stronger advocate for the role that the legislators are supposed to play in this government structure.
Now, Mr. Flegel, I want to ask you, we spoke just recently with Attorney Turnbull about the fact-finding mission that Senator Viale has spoken about. I want to ask your take. Do you think in his leadership role that the community can realistically expect to see any type of noticeable improvements in oversight when it comes to the 36th legislature and addressing some of these issues that's currently being faced?
I sincerely hope so. I don't have high confidence in that, but I certainly hope so and would like to see that happen for our community. Any one of us can take steps towards oversight, and every person who is an elected representative of the people of the Virgin Islands has the opportunity to do that with both the chair that they hold, but also in terms of the voice that they have within the media and our community. And so rallying people for issues of oversight, rallying people to take care and make sure that we don't have kind of the pervasive corruption that we've had for so long in places in the Virgin Islands, I think is something that anybody in elected office has the power to do.
Attorney Turnbull, what do you think effective oversight looks like from the incoming Senate body?
You know, I think it is having the hearings, asking the important questions, and then following up. I think oftentimes we have agencies come to the legislature. We see a number of senators do a lot of grandstanding, and then nothing really happens. There is no real follow-up as to the issues that's plaguing the Virgin Islands. And so I think for people to, and Senator Donna Frett-Gregory said the word ego, putting their egos to the side to really work for the people of the Virgin Islands.
Yeah. Now, I want to switch gears to the Virgin Islands Supreme Court's opinion that the Superior Court does not have the legal authority to require criminal defendants to pay for GPS monitoring as a condition of their release. Attorney Turnbull, as a criminal defense attorney, what impact does this opinion have for your clients?
Tremendous. What it can do is, I believe that it may bind the magistrate judges to consider whether someone truly needs to be on electronic monitoring. Electronic monitoring and its use as a release condition has just progressively increased over a number of years. 20 years ago, this was really not heard of in the magnitude that it is now. And it's really across the nation. And it's a pseudo type detention. And so I think you'll see less people on it until such time that the Supreme Court has instituted the fees. And so more freedom for people is always something that I like. And if you look at the data, there's not a lot of people that violate their bail conditions, and there are not a lot of people that skip bail. And so I think it's a good decision.
Now, Attorney Carrington, do you think the Supreme Court will now move quickly to set these fees, or could we see some delays that might leave the system in limbo?
Well, if I was quite surprised when I read the ruling that it was the Supreme Court who dropped the ball. They are the ones who are supposed to set the fees, and apparently they did not. And what I see is emblematic or illustrative of what happens throughout government. Rules and regulations, fee schedules, all these things are supposed to be put in place by this department or that department, and it never is. So I would hope for economic reasons, so that they don't lose too much money, that the Supreme Court act swiftly in putting a fee schedule together with respect to ankle monitoring.
Now, Mr. Flegel, the court administrator has said the defendants who already pay these fees won't be reimbursed. Does this seem fair, especially for those who waited years for trial and face some financial strain?
I don't think so. I think if we've decided and that we all understand that you're innocent until proven guilty, all of us have that presumption of innocence, that if we have imposed a fee that was done so unjustly on somebody, that it should be reimbursed. It doesn't make any difference, any sense why we wouldn't do that. I'm really glad that we are looking at how, and I think the Supreme Court here in the Virgin Islands made a good decision in this front, because they said, hey, look, you can't just say, here's a fee that goes on an innocent person without a trial, and that person must be able to pay that. I hope that the court does not now go forward and set a fee and say, okay, now lower court, you're allowed to impose this on somebody, because I think it's really an issue of innocent until proven guilty, and all innocent people should enjoy the opportunity to have the freedom of innocence with reasonable bail restrictions, I think, but I don't think that includes the cost of the state's job of monitoring them.
Attorney Turnbull, do you anticipate that somebody is going to challenge this?
No, I need you to clarify the question. Challenge it if the Supreme Court issues fees?
Yes.
Okay. They could. It's not something that is done everywhere. And I agree so much with what Mr. Flegel said. It is innocent until proven guilty. And we just don't have the data for why we're putting these ankle monitors on people. We are on an island. The likelihood of people jumping bail, the likelihood of people not following release conditions is so slim that it is wholly unnecessary. And I think something that people need to remember is that we are putting ankle monitors on individuals who are, for the most part, indigent. The vast majority of individuals that are arrested are represented by the Office of the Territorial Public Defender. And so to then tie their freedom pre-trial to whether they're able to pay seems unfair. Compounding the issue is that we have a backlog in our judicial system right now. And so there is no real concrete Speedy Trial Act that is being followed. And so individuals can be on pre-trial release for years. And so if someone wants to be released, then they would be paying upwards of $300 a month. That is an extra bill that no one can anticipate paying just so that they can have their freedom. And all this time, they're still innocent. If we look at the case that the appeal came from, the case was dismissed. Yeah. And so it is concerning. It is something that I think we as a society need to think about hard and come to a medium. So, yeah.
Right. Now, Attorney Carrington, do you think that those who are not being reimbursed should challenge the decision to, in fact, get that reimbursement, who have already been paid and who now are no longer on pretrial release?
I mean, that's an individual choice. I mean, if it were me, given the ruling, I would probably challenge, especially given what Attorney Turnbull says, up to $300 a month, and somebody can be on pretrial release for years. That's a lot of money coming out of somebody's pocket that can ill afford it.
Now, I want to ask about the effectiveness, though, of the pretrial release of the ankle monitoring. You know, Attorney Carrington, we did see a man just recently in the island of St. Croix who was on pretrial release, who did have that ankle monitor, but somehow was still managed to murder his ex-girlfriend. Now, what does that say about the effectiveness of the electronic monitoring?
It doesn't bode well for the argument that it's effective. I know the case that you're speaking about, and so I tend to argue on the side that Attorney Turnbull, that where's the data that shows that this is an effective measure to take with respect to criminal defendants. We often do things here without the benefit of data, without looking at data, and data would let us know whether or not this is an effective measure that we should be instituting.
All right. Now, last week we talked about the whistleblower case involving the RT Park, and now there's a whistleblower lawsuit recently filed against the Virgin Islands Housing Finance Authority. Now, Attorney Carrington, I do want to stick with you once again. For those who may not be familiar, what exactly qualifies as a whistleblower activity? Does it only apply to actions taken while someone is still employed, or can it still be considered whistleblowing after they've left their position?
Generally, my understanding is that a whistleblower is somebody that's employed. That does not mean that a person can't whistleblow, can't divulge information about corruption once that person is gone. But the Whistleblower Act, I think, protects that person from recrimination and retaliation while that person is an employee.
Now, Mr. Flegel, the lawsuit claims that HUD disqualified several projects for not following procurement policies. How serious is that for an agency like Virgin Islands Housing Finance Authority, which relies heavily on federal funding, especially in terms of the impact on the recovery process?
I think it's very important. I mean, we need to remember that we have $15 billion of federal money in the pipeline to support infrastructure here in the Virgin Islands. If we cannot spend that money effectively, then we are losing out on a huge once-in-a-lifetime opportunity in the Virgin Islands. So our oversight locally in being able to ensure that these projects go off without a hitch is so key to making sure that we're enriched by the funds that have been offered to us by the federal government.
All right. Now, Attorney Turnbull, I want to get your take on that.
Yeah, I agree. It is vital. I do want to kind of couch it into terms of the lawsuit. It is not, I don't believe, currently seems to be an allegation that could meet muster under the Whistleblower Act. But it is important for all the reasons that Mr. Flegel has indicated. It is some allegations that indicate, I mean, just a long passage of time before we can get things off the ground. And I don't know what exactly the issue is. I don't know if it's a shortage in the labor force, competencies and skill sets that is causing the delay and the issues to occur, because that seems to be a recurring theme across agencies, just a mismanagement as a result of not having the skilled workforce to engage in these federal funds, because it's very restrictive. To follow the regulations and remain compliant is very difficult, and it takes a particular skill set to do that. And so is there a shortage, or is this just rampant incompetency, you know?
Yeah. Now, Attorney Carrington, the lawsuit also claims that the Housing Finance Authority hasn't built any new homes in over 6 years, even though it's collected $14 million through stamp tax legislation. What kind of impact does this have on the public's views on the recovery process?
Well, I mean, I was fortunate in that I had no damage during any of the storms, but I mean, I listen to the talk shows on a daily basis, and and I hear the anguish of the people who have been affected by the storms, and the fact that some people are still living in the very houses, the very homes that have been damaged, and we continue to get rain, and we continually every year we have a hurricane season, and so for 7 years, some people have been in a position where they can't they get no relief. I'd like to go back to a point that Attorney Turnbull made, though. I think that one of the things that we do here in the Virgin Islands is that with every new administration, naturally, the new administration brings in their people. The problem with that, I find, is that you sometimes you throw out the baby with the bathwater. You take people who have the skill set and the competency which is needed to move projects forward and to run organizations and agencies, and you replace them with people who have to start from square one. So that's a problem, and it shows in not only in the Virgin Islands Housing Finance Authority, but in other agencies throughout our government.
Now, Mr. Flegel, we've heard the input from Attorney Carrington and from Attorney Turnbull. I want to ask you, what kind of impact do you think that this has on the public's view for the recovery process?
The public, as I said earlier, and I think this is a theme that goes through all of these issues that we're looking at with government, the public confidence in our government is low. It's really, really low. And it's low because people see the results, and you can't argue with that. If every day you're driving over potholes, if you have to pick up your school your kid from school all the time because the air conditioning doesn't work, or there's another plumbing leak at the same school and so forth, when these things happen all the time, people see the results. It's not because of something somebody said, it's because we feel it, we live it, we notice it. And that's what we're looking at with government. Now, when we see a government that is also on top of that, doing things that play into the concerns we already have because we see the results, and these are things like corruption or illegal storage of wood on a schoolyard, or if we see somebody who is favoring one contract over another because of some personal connection as opposed to making the best choice for the people, then our confidence level drops even lower. And that is something that I think is repeated over and often by the people of the Virgin Islands.
Attorney Turnbull, with this lawsuit, how do you think, and the allegations that are within it, how do you think that affects the public trust in the process of how things are moving when it comes to our recovery process, when it comes to housing in the territory, which we know there is a housing crisis? What do you think that a lawsuit like this says to the public?
Well, I think it depends on if the public reads the media of the lawsuit or if they read the lawsuit itself. If you read the lawsuit itself, it is filled with a number of allegations that don't really touch on government or government management, and so I believe you would have a mixed opinion. But if you read the media, it does appear, I think, to the community and to society that organizations and agencies that we entrust to be run and managed effectively are not being managed effectively. But I think that we have to take the good and the bad. I think sometimes we tend to harp on all the things that government is not doing well. Government is not managing this well. Government is not managing that well. But there have been a number of successes across the three branches of government. But I think for this particular lawsuit and this particular news coverage, it does appear, and then you don't see the results of the homes. I think that's the biggest issue with VIHFA. We're not seeing the results of the homes. I think with this particular lawsuit, it does reduce the trust.
Now, let's take a moment to talk about the Crucian Christmas Festival, which is just days away. The Festival Village lineup is typically announced months in advance, but this year, the first confirmed act wasn't revealed until December 3rd. Then on the 14th, the dates for Juve and the food fair were switched. Alwyn Baptiste Jr., a former village honoree, posted on Facebook that the Division of Festivals must do better. His post got hundreds of likes and comments, and even drew a response from Governor Albert Bryan Jr. himself, who suggested that he send an email instead of sharing vague concerns on a public forum. Now, looking at how the Division of Festivals is structured, the director, Ian Turnbull, resides in the St. Thomas-St. John district, with Assistant Director Halvert Hart on St. Thomas and Leona Smith on St. John. Meanwhile, on St. Croix, Shamari Haynes, who was the Assistant Director, was promoted to Deputy Commissioner of Tourism last year and seems to be balancing both roles. Attorney Carrington, does this setup have an impact on the St. Croix Festival and how it's planned and executed? And, could it help explain why some Cruisians might feel like festival isn't getting the attention it deserves?
Well, what I think is that we ran festival and carnival, in my opinion, better before we had this division of festivals. And I think that festivals such as these should be run more on the local level. When I say local, I mean St. Croix Festival should be run by people on the ground here. And similarly in St. Thomas and St. John, because, that's how it traditionally was done. And so I think that while we create government bureaucracies to hopefully do things better, it doesn't always pan out that way.
Now, Mr. Flegel, why do you think it seems like the Division of Festival takes a little bit longer to announce village entertainment for St. Croix compared to St. Thomas? And could this delay lead to less excitement and make out-of-towners less likely to plan a trip to the St. Croix Festival, causing lower turnout?
Yeah, I have no idea. I do wonder why an event that happens every single year, we don't make it a priority to calendar it early on. People plan things, and I don't just mean that obviously tourists plan things and people talk about which hotel room should I book or how should I do this. But a lot of bookings that we get at our hotel come from people who live in St. Thomas and want to come to the festival in St. Croix, and they're making last minute decisions. If they can't book in advance to know exactly what they're coming for, they can't plan. And then I think of the festival troops, and the festival troops are trying to create a whole schedule for themselves and how that all works. And you talk about then the lineups with music and so forth. It's a lot to juggle, but because it's a lot to juggle, there comes with it a responsibility to plan that well in advance to make it easier for everybody.
Now, Attorney Turnbull, I want to ask you, having these delayed schedules, does that make you as a St. Thomas resident maybe a little bit wary on whether or not you're making the decision to go over to the Big Island for the festival season?
Well, I think to be fair to the Division of Festivals, their theme and lineup and announcement came out something like 4 months prior to festival last year. But they dropped the ball this year. But we do have to be fair to them in that regard. I think the concern which they state when they go to the legislature is being able to have those contracts executed. As you know, you cannot advertise having a particular artist until you have cut that check to that artist. And securing artists during the holiday season of Christmas, New Year's poses a challenge and has continued to pose a challenge. And it seems like this year it posed a major challenge when they released December 3rd. And so they can improve and they should improve, but I don't want the opinion or the perspective to be as though this is an every year thing. It's just the facts don't back it up. But yes, I think that they release each year. They release the dates about 9 months to a year in advance. But we do need the lineups because certain individuals will travel for a particular artist because our village is free. And so I think they've heard the outcry, and I would hope they do better next year.
Now, you just spoke about, the village being free and the financial impacts. Now, do you think that maybe it's time that we start possibly looking at maybe a small menial fee for the village in order to generate more revenues, since the department has noted financial issues as far as booking events and on all of these other varying aspects?
I think that is a community decision, right? I believe that festivals and carnival are for the people. They belong to the people. I'm somebody that is for the people. And so I think that decision should not be made in a vacuum by just a number of talking heads around the table for Division of Festivals. I think it should be put out to the community, and the community should give feedback. Right now, if you look in society and if you look on social media, there's a divide. Some people think that it's for us, so it should be free, and let us free up ourselves. And other people are like, we are the only place in the Caribbean doing this, providing top-notch, high-rated artists for free, every night for free. So I think it's a community decision. Where do I fall on that line? I don't have a problem with a small fee. I just don't.
All right. Now, Attorney Carrington, talking about financial concerns, bringing in these world-class festival acts, do you think it's time to consider charging a small fee to enter the village?
You know, the economics of it all, I mean, these artists that come from all over the world cost money. That's true. But if I may answer the question from this perspective, I think that our carnivals, our festivals have become too much commercial rather than cultural. I'm from the old school. I used to play in the parades in the village. I was in a band that won the road march. We never got any money for that. You hear people spending $1,500 for a costume, people charging for juve. It's become too commercial. I think the commercialization of our festivals and carnivals loses the essence that it used to have, where it came from the people.
Now, Mr. Flegel, I want to ask you, get your thoughts on this. Is it time to consider charging a small fee? Do you agree with Mr. Attorney Carrington that it's become too commercialized?
I do agree with Attorney Carrington on this. And I think that the likelihood that a small fee is the solution for the path forward is very small. I don't support it, and I don't think most of the people would support it either. That said, are there ways of doing revenue generation? A lot of money is exchanged in hands at the festival. There's lots of food vendors that happen. There's advertisement dollars that go into it. So it's not just like it's only the government that participates and provides this money, even though they do the lion's share of the heavy lifting to put this event on. So I think that sometimes, and I come from Los Angeles, and in Los Angeles we had lots of free events with a much larger budget, and I recognize that difference. But I want to say it is not like it's unusual, even if it's unusual in the Caribbean. It's very common for communities all around the world to put on free festivals, free events for the community. I'm really glad, and I'm happy to be part of a community where that happens here in St. Croix.
All right. Well, I want to thank you all for your input today, and that's all the time we have for today's show. We'll return to Comes with the Territory on Sunday, January 19, 2025. In the meantime, for your news updates, tune into the WTJX news feed on weekdays at 5 p.m. on 93.1 FM or by downloading the WTJX app. Enjoy the rest of your holiday season and have a happy new year. I'm Marcelina Ventura Douglas from all of us here at WTJX Channel 12. Take care.